Thank you. Let's start sharing. Okay, thank you very much. I'll explain more the framework, not just the evolution, because it's a part of a 16-week series that we offer to the seminary attendees, which are all graduate students, and some priests and some bishops also attended. And I wanted to share with you the bigger picture. The outline that we'll focus on today is that the work of apologetics is not a work of teaching, but actually it's a work of washing the feet. It's an act of love, so that people don't doubt the presence of God out of ignorance. And that happens very, very often, and it aches the heart of any father, and all of you. This is not a work of debate, it's a work of serving. St. Peter told us that in 1 Peter 3:15, that revere Christ in your heart, but be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the reason of the faith or the hope that you have, and do this in meekness and humility. So there's 3 requests here. We have to revere God, and we have to be ready to give an answer. And we do this not in an elite way, but rather in a service way. And I've tasted the beauty of this in sitting with so many youth, or either undergrad or high school or grad, or even people working in the field of genetics and doctors. And it's beautiful to see the service working. That is not an act of giving I'm better than you, I know better than you, but rather let us reason together, says the Lord. Faith and intellect. Intellect is a gift from God. God is the Logos, in the name of the Father and the Logos and the Holy Spirit. So how would God give us a mind, and he asks us to turn it off or down when we discuss any of the topics around us? Because we're going to talk about the origin of life and where evolution has been playing a role, and whether it's true or not, and I'm willing to hear all of your questions during or after. So there is we have to study the history of anything before we delve into it. This is by nature. My background relates to this. It's engineering, just to relate to you why anything we study, we have to know the history of it, where the laws come from, what is the mind of the scientist, why did they make these decisions. It helps very, very much to be in their mind as they are looking for something, and we'll see what that something is, which is the holy grail of life sciences. Abiogenesis, which is the DNA is going to be a nemesis for the abiogenesis, and is going to be the focus. Nemesis means an enemy. Abiogenesis means the presence of life by natural forces on its own. There's no one behind it. There's no mind behind it. Polymerase will complicate the case for the abiogenesis, and we'll see this. We'll see what polymerase is. The DNA and the protein synthesis and the folding, that's another very, very tough thing to swallow, that it comes by evolution. Information is unidirectional or bidirectional. I might not cover all of these, but just because of this meeting, it was very, very encouraging to publish a book. I was working on it for a while, and I was working on it for the past 2 days to get it on Amazon. I will give you the link to it, and it relates to things we'll discuss today, so that you can have it handy. But it's thanks to you, in fact, that put a fire under it. It's work in progress. There might be other revisions, but it is very, very healthy information that will relate to what we're going to talk about today. Chance and time, extremely improbable. I will discuss this as well, because it was the answer of people I debated with. They respect very, very much the approach I'm using, but then they come up with an answer, and I will show you how that answer also is. It's a challenge that to their argument. One of the angles that I will delve in deeper is that there is similarity between transcription and translation, which is how proteins are made, and why is that important to discuss and to cover. It's actually very relevant to digital communication systems. I will not get, this might be at the very tail end if we get to it. If we don't, I will do more detail in it, but it is, it's just, I'll show you that from different angles, this system to come into existence on its own, you will judge at the end whether it's probable or very, very highly improbable to the point of being impossible. Feature work is feedback control systems also exist a lot in biology, and these systems have to be stable. There's a huge work. Our undergrad degree was mainly control systems. That's for systems to be stable and to not go out of control, which is used in anything from the air conditioning system to controlling an airplane. These systems have to be stable, and there is a lot of biological systems in the body and in nature that have to operate in a stable way. And feedback means that it has to exist completely from the beginning as a feedback control system. We might not cover everything, but the main thing I'm going to cover is the DNA, the question of life, basically, and maybe the translation, transcription, which is how proteins are manufactured in any species. Okay, so the first thing is that discussion and debate is an act that Christ went through willingly or unwillingly, and he entertained any question. And to some people, he talked in parables, and with the disciples who didn't understood, he postponed it till the Holy Spirit comes on them, and then the private lessons for them, which they didn't take notes of while they were being with him, the Holy Spirit brought to the remembrance everything that he has talked about, and he has promised them the Comforter in John 14, 15, and 16, that he will be with them and then he will be in them. So Christ entertained any discussion, and he simplified the discussion for the main listeners that were not with him all the time. And these were the parables to make them amenable to their understanding from life experiences. The mind is a gift to man from God. So it has to be employed. It cannot be shut down. And there's
on mute for some reason.
I'm on mute.
Maybe without, yeah, this is not lighting up.
Are you guys hearing me or not? I can start over if it was not heard. You see? No, I'm not on mute. So take your time. There's no rush. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So do you want me to repeat from the beginning? Did I miss the first part?
Yeah.
So start over?
No. Just the last part.
The last part.
Just the last part.
This part or before?
Oh, this part.
This one. So the first part is that our work is an act of love, not an act of being, I'm going to give you a sermon of how wrong you are. And that approach is very, very important to the listener to see that they are respecting their thinking and giving them that you're there not to show that they are wrong. You're there to apply, let us reason together, says the Lord. Christ himself entertained all of the listeners, met them where they are by using parables for the people, and then private lessons for the disciples. Then when they did not understand it, he told them that the Holy Spirit will remind them of everything that he has taught them. That's why they shouldn't say anything till they receive the Holy Spirit, which happened in the book of Acts and happened prior to that to the disciples in the priesthood when they were ordained by Christ in St. John chapter 20, when he breathed in their face from 21 to 23, the chapter of the resurrection. The mind is a gift to man from God. It is a gift, has to be employed, and our faith will not suppress the mind in order to believe God more in God. And one of the angles of loving God more, in fact, is to show how our faith is very logical. The love of Christ compels us to wash the feet, to offer an explanation. And when we are accused, we explain. يفترى علينا فنعظ. So it is a mandate on every Christian that as an act of love, even if you don't know the answer, that to love the person who challenges your faith. If they are going to listen, fine. If they are not, it's a blessing to you that you engage. Faith and science, the approach in two is two different ways. Science is empirical in the lab. Faith has axioms that could be searched for and validated by the intellect, and that is one of the biggest attraction here in Christianity, is the work of the mind is not to be suppressed, but rather to be enhanced. The intellect is the bigger circle of science. There is logic in the intellect. There is abstraction, which is meditation. Again, not to believe just blindly, but meditation in the character of God, in the love of God, in the gifts of God, and among them is the love and the mind. The logic is employed very, very heavily to reach conclusions, and God is a very big part of the logic. Actually, the word logic comes from logos, which is the name or the term for the Son in the Holy Trinity. One of the big angles I use is this in that Christianity is logical, something called probabilities and belief networks. It's heavily employed in AI for any intelligent system to make a decision and then to remember that decision and learn from it. In fact, we program AI this way because our way of thinking is logical, how to train some machine to make decisions on its own. So for example, here, if there is, just a mainstream example, if there is the life expectancy of a patient is affected by a certain diet, are there any other effects on it that affects the life of the patient, not just the diet, but there is also the demographics, there is the age. So it gives us a pictorial what would affect a certain conclusion, or what are the weight, or what is the how heavy the diet affects the life expectancy, how heavy the demographics, how heavy the age. So there is aggregation of inputs that makes the output, which is the life expectancy, be a certain conclusion based on the probabilities of each of these inputs. The big picture for the class that is about 16 weeks long is a framework, not just a sporadic explanation of different disconnected topics. So I'll show you an example of this. The level 1 topics, which is has no mention of God or the church or anything that has any tone of religion, because the person engaging there is looking for an argument, not looking for a sermon. And this set of lectures takes about 8 weeks. Each one is 3 hours long. So this level takes half of the whole class because it's the toughest to engage in our way of speaking. It covers science, and science mainly evolution and cosmology, the Big Bang and the origin of life. History and logic are engaged into how can I logically argue for is this movement called Christianity, which relies on somebody who was on the cross and they claim that he is God. Is this movement logical? Is it a fairy tale? Is it a hoax? Is it a way to scam money? What is it? And this is without using the Bible at all. And then there is philosophy, but because of the other angles of the class, I don't involve it much, just because I don't have enough room. So level 1 will discuss the deduction on the absence or existence of someone behind the creation, and also the movement of the people that claimed that this man on the cross allegedly is God or not. And this is, I repeat, without using the Bible, which is one of the most interesting way, and it works very, very well from age junior high to adults, because it doesn't require except logic. So if there is someone behind the universe, behind biology, if there is, in which religion he's captured. So we discuss here how to compare world viewpoints from coming from different faiths, if there is someone which movement captures him best. And we don't cover everything here. It's left actually to class projects of the students. But one of the main things to train them is this 3 or 4 hours spent on Mormonism and how to understand it in order to compare Christianity with Mormonism. So the idea is to train the students with enough information, but the main way of mindset with the questions of homework, how to think, especially in this level, they're already trained on not just information, but how to think through any problem. Mormonism, and if any Mormon would attend that lecture, he would not be offended. That's very, very important, is that you're not belittling the others, you're actually showing that there is problems with the world viewpoints that are there. So this is, by that time, it's week 9. If it's the Christian God, this is my favorite. In which Christianity? Christianity that says the body and the blood of the Lord is symbolic, or the one that says it's real? And there is a book that God willing will be out soon that shows Christianity as a problem solution approach that will get the person to conclude from the Bible only, because it's very suited for the Protestant that say it's symbolic and we want to serve them. We want to show that the Christ that they love, we want to give them the utmost relationship, which is union with Christ. It's not just a relationship, but they want to show it from the Bible only. So I know this as a class, there's actually a set of lectures. I used to do it for the past 4 years for converts only, and mainly Protestants. And by God's grace, they have all adopted Orthodoxy. Now I opened it for the Coptic congregation this year, and the response is basically understanding the creation and the salvation is very, very novel, to do it as a problem solution approach, to understand that communion cannot be a symbol, has to be real from the scripture. This is now, that is called the apostolic faith. So it's not a debate, it's really, let's use the Bible and see. I'll give you a framework to understand the Bible, but it's not for the discussion for today, but it's one of the most pleasurable topics ever. Our discussion for today is in this rectangle here for science. Then we all operate in this since our youth, which is great to acquire habits, to acquire the liturgy, to acquire the service. We've been operating in level 4, and it becomes very dangerous to use the Bible to discuss level 1. Then the person will say, you're starting from belief. Even the logic whether Christianity is man-made or not, I don't start with the resurrection at all. In fact, I don't mention it. But it's not the topic for today, but it's a standalone subject called, is Christianity man-made or not? So we're going to be here. So important foundational approach, there are 2 different areas. Faith is philosophical or metaphysical, while the latter, which is science, is physical. That will not pose a problem. But when science concludes that based on the experiments or based on the findings, there is no God, then we cannot be quiet. We have to interfere. We have to start answering, because it got into a philosophical deduction. And that deduction pertains to us. But when we answer, this metaphysical above physics, above the physical conclusions, the physical conclusions, here's the science, the metaphysical is this. Based on this science, there is no one entity that started either life or cosmology. So when that conclusion is made, then we step in, not from the Bible, but we step in from science. And that's the whole way of training of the way to approach it, is more than just the material. But we'll get into some material, of course. So science uses 2 legs: cosmology, the Big Bang, and evolution in biology. And both are facts, by the way. Evolution is a fact and the Big Bang is a fact. I will cover evolution today, but the Big Bang has a longer topic, because I'll have to explain the history of physics and cosmology in order to see the mind of scientists. I might show just very brief pictures of it, but will not discuss it for sure in this presentation. And the conclusion, there is no one behind, call him whatever, but there's no, this is all self-started, in the universe, self-nucleated, and in the biology, its evolution or the origin of the species is attributed to the tree of life that Darwin has proposed. So the defense, which is these are the red arrows, are like basically there's no God. So the faith will answer, but I on purpose put the arrows here inside the circle of science, not biblically. The defense is not to answer science from the Bible, because the Bible is not a scientific book. However, if there is time at the end, I'll show you an amazing depiction of Genesis 1 at the very end, if time permits, and if you have any energy to listen to it. It's in the book of the communion. The amazing relevance between Genesis 1 and the liturgy is just an amazing, really grace of God that enabled the noticing it. But rather to use the implications of their conclusions. So the conclusions is that there is no God. So we'll get into science and show these conclusions are scientifically valid or scientifically good science or not, because it can become a faith here. They could get faith, there's no God, teach evolution, teach the Big Bang, without getting back into this question of origin, and that is what we're having today. But I'll get your feedback at the end. So evolutionary theory claims that it explains the origin of life, and cosmology claims the Big Bang is the beginning of the universe on its own. Therefore, there is no one behind it. If we prove scientifically or give enough evidence that evolutionary theory cannot account for the origin of life for reasons we'll see today, and cosmology cannot prove that the universe started by itself. In fact, there is two events that has to happen before the Big Bang to happen, and that's from physics and quantum mechanics mainly. That's why it's a heavy subject in the cosmology, even harder than the evolution topic. But these are the main things that I had to delve into science deeply to give scientific explanation of the history of science in it, and how people make conclusions, and how today things are suppressed in order to people who don't get deep can be just convinced by it. So today, in the origin of living matter, we have to search for origin of the traits transfer. The whole holy grail that I talked about at the beginning is people are looking how traits are moving from the parents to the children. Observation of evolution, that's what Darwin has given a very intelligent deduction for it, which is excellent. He was also affected by Lyell, who did the same thing in geology, to observe from the current movements of what's in the present to deduce what happened in the past. That's the main approaches that both of these scientists, Lyell in geology and Darwin in life sciences. The discovery of the DNA and the shape of it. And after this, we get into genetics advancement. Genetic advancement, I need to delve in it more. My background is not biology or biochemistry, but because of these systems becoming actually like digital systems, as I'll show you today, we talk from an angle that biology and biochemistry might not notice, and it's actually the whole essence of how we can tackle the question. The origin of matter, the Big Bang. This is the cosmology angle, which we will not cover today. So when I discussed abiogenesis with multiple people, the person discussing with found that my arguments were very, very solid, from people that are physicians, very, very much into genetics. And the angle I give today says they say that is very, very strong argument, but they resort to chance, which I will answer. I haven't gotten back to them, in fact, because I wanted to enhance it more and more. That chance could have started the very, very beginning. And I'll show you how that is difficult as well. So chance has formed the first RNA, which led to the DNA. Then evolution, proven from the field of genetics, has caused the rise of all the species by selection from all, to form all the species. But the idea here is that due to the arguments I offered, they had to resolve that things came at the very beginning by chance. And I'll show you Why is that scientifically extremely improbable right here? Okay, so let's get into the material. The flow of the argument. Fact, God doesn't exist. That's to start where it's being offered to us. Okay, based on this fact, therefore, life started by itself. In other words, only forces of nature, remember, only forces of nature are the agent behind the origin of life. Before I forget, forces of nature in biology is biochemistry. How things stick together is biochemistry. Biochemistry is the glue where things are sticking together in biology, as we'll see today in the DNA, how it looks like. So forces of nature is not magnetism or electricity when you start forming life, and we'll discuss what life is, just in case I forget to clearly show what forces of nature are. We'll mention it again. So the question comes down, can forces of nature start life? What is life? So we have to scientifically crystallize what life is. We'll see now. So what is life at the time of Darwin, who formed backwards because he showed the motions forward of life, and he concluded backwards it must have come from a single cell. That is basically the origin of it. So for the time of Darwin, the single cell started, and by the forces of selection, although it requires reproduction, and that hasn't happened yet, but anyway, we'll say that a single cell came into existence, and by speciation, natural selection, it speciated into different things, and with time, it became the multiple species that we observe. But Darwin had things about the cell that he was not aware of yet because it wasn't discovered yet. So what is life as we know it today? Scientifically, what is life as we know it today scientifically? Let's summarize what Darwin has put as 4 axioms before we get into it. Individual variations are exhibited in individual organisms within each population of species. These variations are due to mutations. Mutations are generally beneficial, making the organism more suited for their environment. That's the individual variation. Heritability. Due to natural selection, organisms with advantageous traits will have a greater probability of success in reproducing. Difference between generations. The individuals that will survive against harsh conditions and have the ability to reproduce will create a new generation of offspring. It's more suited for the environment, which are with more favorable traits than their predecessors. This mechanism of adaptations will increase their survivability and reproducibility. The 4th point, overreproduction. Crowding of a species will render the resource of their environment relatively more scarce compared to the species population size. So they'll survive, but they'll become so populating the area that the food will not be enough for them, leading to the organism with advantageous traits. So the very strongest of the stronger will survive. They will eventually pass their traits to their offspring. This shows that the fittest only will survive. So this is a dynamic process that happens. He observed it. In fact, it exists in all the species. And he proposed that that's how species come from one another, that there's some change happens that will lead to another species that's more suitable. He didn't discuss the origin, but in his tree of life that he drew, he said that therefore, looking backwards, then whole life started from a single cell. And that is basically the backward deduction from the evolutionary theory. And this is, in fact, the same approach that Lyell in geology, which was contemporary with Darwin, that says things in dynamics or in motion now are, when we observe them, can explain to us what happened in the past. So he formed this hypothesis about the origin of life is the formation of the single cell. So before we get into the mechanics of what life is, we have to give a brief introduction of what science was discovering along the way, because it will affect our zoning in why we discuss a certain point that we will zone in on today. So in the 18th century, life is about how it's maintained, how it continues. And the origin of life is proposed, as we'll see, among studying the history of science, as they are trying to find out where things are stored, how it's manifested to pass it to the children. So this is the big title: the transfer of traits from parents to children and the origin of life and evolution. It starts with, let's see how scientists were, what they were looking for: traits, transfer, and life. Where is the life of the organism? Where are the information stored? How is the information transferred? In the 18th century, the discovery of the cell by Robert Hooke and Schwann and Schleiden, they discovered is actually we are made, or any matter is made of a single living enclosures, and that's it's called the cell. So that's the very big advancement. That's before Darwin, of course. So that's why they say things started from a single cell. In the 19th century, passing traits from parents to children, the search is on for an answer to this propagation of life question. Gregory Mendel was actually a monk, said that the hereditary information is in fact digital. It's not just like mixing two paints together. When you have yellow and blue and you mix them together, you get yellowish blue or bluish yellow. In fact, no, it's a very segregated, it's very itemized. And he labeled it the uppercase X and Y and the lowercase x and Y. This means that the traits are described by discrete information, not continuous information, not just two things you just mixed. It's based on very clear proportions between what he labeled as four different entities. And you who studied, of course, biology and biochemistry will be more expert at this than me. So it's not like a paint mixture. We call it segregated. We call it digital. We call it itemized. Then this is the mind that was a major, very, very, in the same era, having these two coming in the same time, 1865 and 1859, shortly before it. Charles Darwin published The Origin of the Species. He discovered the evolution process, but then he labeled it origin, that based on what I observed as things in motion today in biology, I can tell you what happened in the past at the very beginning, which is the single cell coming into existence. Origin of the species, the birth of the term origin, البداية, as being a conclusion from the observed process of propagation. So he observed the process of how we go forward, and he hypothesized about what things happened in the very beginning, the origin. This is a backward in time deduction, similar to geological deductions about the past of the observation of Earth formations. And that's very valid, and that's genius, and that's very, very applauded. Carl Nageli and Walter Fleming focus on the chromosomes discovering the cell division process. That's actually the cell, it has children, it divides, and that's how they propagate to continue existence. Then now the aggressive search for what specifically carries in the 19th century, carries the traits information of the species. So there's now the cell divides, and then when you have the children, where exactly stored is this XY information, which is observed to happen through the evolution process. The children inherit things from the parents. So components and wrong conclusions and correct conclusions. So the components happen, I'm giving a quick overview. By nuclein discovery, Friedrich Miescher isolated what he called nuclein, a new molecule from the cell nucleus. The search is aggressively what carries the information, where is it stored? Because it's not like mixing paints together and you get the children. There's specific information stored somewhere. Where is that place? That's in the 19th century with the nuclein, hence the word the DNA comes later on, is isolated as a new molecule from the nucleus cell. In the 20th century, where things aggressively advanced, in the first half of it, Levine in the early 1900s discovered the nucleotides had some common and some different constituents. Comes from the word nuclein. The common elements are phosphate and deoxyribose sugar. The different elements which leads to the difference among the four nucleotides are nitrogenous base elements, and they are called cytosine, adenine, thymine, and guanine. Now we're getting into concrete things about this nuclein. Is now we're knowing what it is formed of. It's still not known yet how it carries information. Then amino acids later on discovered that there is 20 of them. So this nucleotides are 4, while the amino acids are discovered to be 20. So based on the number 20, you can create more configuration and carry more combinations from it than just 4. All the combinations you can get from 4 is 2 to the power 4 or 4 to the power 4 in any order. But when you have 20, to arrange them in any combination will give you much more combinations that you can have. So Levine discovered that 20 different types present more variations than just 4 nucleotides, and also amino acids are more configurable than fixed connections, because there's affinity between them, of the nucleotides, 20 versus 4. So he thought, in fact, the bigger proponent for storing information, in fact, in amino acids, not in the nucleotides. And he proposed that the DNA looks as a fixed pattern like this that repeats: cytosine, adenine, guanine, thymine, and it just repeats. It's a fixed pattern that just cut and paste, and that's what the DNA is. So that was the proposal by Levine in the 1900s. Second half of the 20th century, some Oswald Averley and Frederick Griffith changed this completely by something called the transforming principle. Is that they were able to take a bacteria that was benign and modify it to be virulent, to be not benign, to be attacking whatever it comes across. But they are surviving by the same amino acids. So there is something that they were able to modify, and it's not in the proteins that supports the species, that changes the trait of that bacteria. And that's why they call it the transforming principle. So they were able to forget this amino acid proposal, and with additional work from George Beadle, the gene carries the direction for making one protein. That says that the one-to-one correspondence between a gene formation and the protein it produces. And the transforming principle led to ignore the amino acid and zoom on the DNA, and meantime eliminating the RNA. So the DNA and these nucleotides that are connected together is where they could be modified to make the bacteria from being benign to being virulent. And that was the main focus now is on the DNA. That is the birth, the transforming principle of focusing 100% that the DNA is what carries the information. How it carries it, in what way, it's not discovered yet. Bacteria also carry DNA. Joshua Lederberg and Alfred Hershey and Martha Chase. Now it's all now about the DNA. And then a big discovery by Irvin Chargaff shows that the A to T and the G to C ratio is constant. So this is another thing that they don't know the connection or how it looks like, but just measuring from outside the AT to GC, the AT connection to the GC connection, or these components are a constant. So that led more into why are they constant in a certain species. Till all of this search led to the DNA carries the full hereditary information of the species. Genes are made of DNA. DNA, not protein, is the genetic molecule. So it was in the 20th century second half, early second half, it carries it. How it carries it, it's not known, but it must be there. So how do they contain it? Now, what is the structure of the DNA molecule? That's discovered by crystallography by Rosalind Franklin, who died actually, in fact, with ovarian cancer in 1953. But her work, due to some stuff, and working with Watson and Crick, so her boss, who was not very favorable of her. The whole credit went to Watson and Crick, although they published in the same article of Nature in 1953. So she, through X-ray visualization crystallography, looking at the molecule, and Watson and Crick, they discovered that the shape of the molecule is the helical structure of the DNA. That's what it looks like. So this is why today DNA is concluded to be what carries the hereditary information. And as we know today, how the protein is made out of it, which we'll discuss today as evidence. Can these things come together by just slapping things together, and then voila, it operates, it works. We'll see this now. But I wanted to give the background of what scientists were looking for and how it zoned on this, and later on how this becomes our focus now, that this is in fact the question we're looking for. The correct question that needs to be answered, which is how life started, reframing the question of evolution and its relevance to the origin of life. Fact, DNA contains all the information that encodes the species. Fact, this information is passed on to the children, withstanding some changes, mutations. Fact, claimed by science, the DNA came into integration by some natural processes. There's no God, there's no external agent. Therefore, the correct scientific quest is to investigate the presence of forces of nature that put the DNA together. Can DNA, so the origin of life equals, can DNA be composed together by forces of nature? Forces of nature in this field is biochemistry, the affinity, the attractions that can happen between the components that makes biology work. So let's look at this. What do you mean by natural forces? Natural forces in biology are the affinities described in the field of biochemistry. We call it biochemical affinity. Affinity يعني حاجتين بيحبوا بعض. They have affinity towards somebody, means that you feel relevant to their way of thinking, to their personality. So affinity is basically an elegant way of saying attraction, stronger than just attraction. So let's look at this. And I want to get your full attention in this part. Yeah. So this is the DNA molecule. And the affinity that is happening here is the affinity between the A and the T. Let me use the abbreviation of it because my background is not really science. We stopped it in high school. So I'll use the abbreviation because this is equally valid for discussing it. The A attracts to the T by a hydrogen bond. They have an affinity together, and the G and the C have an affinity together. The information, however, about the species is not read along the horizontal direction, but actually read vertically. I call it vertically just because of the drawing, along the axis of the DNA molecule. The discovery was the helical shape, but we're now discussing, we don't care about the helical shape, we care about the species that is encoded in which direction. And it's encoded in this direction. So this is a portion of the DNA of any species or a specific species. And in order to read that sequence, it would be A, G, T, C, A, T, G, A. This is the direction of it. And because of the DNA repair or the mechanisms that are very complex that happen, if you miss one of these, the system knows by evolution, by some mechanical, biochemical design in it, sorry, let me avoid design. Somehow it knows that because A is here, the affinity to it is only T. So now we agree that the direction of information is this vertical direction. And each species, if you read portions of its vertical direction, it will give you a certain order, a certain sequence. And this is just examples. This is completely hypothetical, just to show that this is what defines what a species is, the sequence of information. Okay, here is the one of the very core concepts that we're going to explain. We have established that the affinity is A attracts to T and C attracts to G. So let me ask you this question. And we see it here in the connections that in the helical structure. Now, here is the question. If I'm standing at a certain connection called AT, hypothetically, can I tell what's coming next? This is the core question. If I am standing at a strand, I'm blindly at a certain strand of the DNA, can I, from this strand, predict what is coming after it? I can predict if this is an A and I lose this one, it must be a T with probability of 1. And vice versa. If this is a T and I'm missing this, I can, with a probability of 1, say that this one is an A. But if I have an AT connection, can I tell what's coming after? Are there any forces of biochemistry that can tell me what's the next one is? Are you with me in that question? This is the core question. If I am at a certain strand of the DNA, is there any way I can know what the next one is? And the answer is no. I can't. And I'm going to prove it in another way. But the idea here, the direction where the sequence of the species is, which is the direction along the sequence, I cannot tell using biochemical affinity what is the strand or the nucleotide pair that's coming next. This is major because the sequence of information that completely describes the species has no biochemical forces, has no biochemical prediction. And here is the evidence. And to prove it very simply, is this: if there is biochemical forces in this direction, the next one has to be T, if there is. And since this is a T, the next one has to be an A, and the next one has to be a T. But that's not the DNA, and there is no affinity. Not only I cannot know what's coming next, that if there is affinity, if there is forces that can mandate what's coming next, the DNA would not exist. It will be just a replica of a certain pattern. By mistake, you might get CG jumping in here, but then the next one will be GC, CG, and so on. This is the most core point that I want to get across before I go further. In the direction of information, which defines the species completely, there is an absence of forces. And if there are forces, it will make the DNA not work, not come into ability to carry information. So, sequence that fully explains species has no biochemical forces to form this sequence. So the origin of DNA to come into existence, and there is absence of forces, which is, we agreed, forces in biology are called biochemical forces. And we have seen by this, the biochemical forces cannot tell me what's next. In fact, biochemical forces have to be absent, have to not be there in order to have a DNA that's flexible enough to carry any information. Exactly as you write a Word document. In order to be able to write any word with freedom, I don't limit you that after the letter A has to come the letter X. What if I do this? Certain words you will never be able to write. All of the words that have another letter other than X after the A, you will not be able to write it because X is now attached to A. So you will lose completely all of the words that have AN, AM, AB, anything, AA. Second, the presence of the letter X doesn't give you any information, whereas this is actually a sequence of information, because once you see an A in your typing, you know the next one is X. We call this in information theory a symbol that carries no information. And this is the beauty of looking at the DNA as a digital system. That I will not get into this, but it's one of the major beauty of now when we discover that biology is digital, we can actually apply a lot of digital insight in it. And that's, I feel, by the grace of God, the discovery of the computer and digital systems before things were analog. If you're engineers, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Is in fact the grace of God that enabled us, when the digital system developed very, very, very advanced, and the digital communication very advanced, it enabled us to look at biology, which nobody knew it was digital, as a digital system. And it helped so much to argue what I'm arguing, that natural forces cannot predict what's the digital symbol that's coming. In fact, if it can, then that system cannot carry information. It becomes rigid. That's a system where you type in a Word document, 80, 80, 80, 80, 80. You'll never have the flexibility to write any document that you want to write. You write documents that you want to write because you have no limit that mandates what is the order of the letters or the spaces or the words or the sentences that give you the full freedom to put any symbol, I mean a letter in this case, after one another. So in English is a digital system. Any language is a digital system. It's a bunch of letters. It happens to be 26 digital symbols in English. In biology, it's 4. In electrical engineering, it's 0 and 1, because it's just the way to design digital systems by 0 voltage or 5 voltage. It's now 3.3. So what's the difference between the two? By the way, I presented this not to that depth to elementary. 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th grade grasped this in concept very, very well. We did apologetics for kids, and I can send you, in fact, on YouTube channel for doing apologetics for children. So this is freedom of putting any letter to form a coherent, let's say, sentence. It just happens to be the alphabet. The order doesn't come because these are magnetic letters attached to the board. Magnetic here is biochemistry in biology. So the B comes after the A, not because of them have a magnet. The magnetism makes them stick to the board. But the B comes after the A because there was a freedom to put it there. So the idea here is the question that needs to be posed to science. Where does the sequence come from? I didn't say God. I didn't say the Bible. I didn't say anything. I am posing a very concrete question. I'm actually defending the science, not defending the faith. A very concrete question. Origin of life is origin of DNA. The DNA, can it come into existence on its own? The answer is no. Because its own means biochemistry. But here, there is no biochemistry in the direction of the information which codes for the species. And if there is, DNA would not be existing. So this is emphasizing that the sticking of the letters to the board is by magnetism, but the order of the letters has nothing to do with magnetism. Example to relate it to the English language, I wish you a Merry Christmas is a sentence I decided to write. Case 1, the writer is free to use any letter without any forcible rules other than the English language verbs and nouns to make it a sentence. That's the linguistics or the grammar. On the sequence of the letters, other than the rules of English, language, grammar, and word meaning. So I am free to write any letter. I can form a sentence. This enables the writer to write any word with no restriction, such as air, elephant, soil, funding, solar, satire, lens. Hence, the writer was able to write the message, I wish you a Merry Christmas. Now, if I say after every S, put a T, that's biochemical forces, like the S is attached to the T. in English, I'm going to attach them together. I will lose the freedom. The writer is constrained by forces between the S and the T, that every S has to have a T after it, which means that the writer, under the rule that there is a certain affinity between T and S, that they always have to appear in the form of ST everywhere. Two facts will result from this affinity, from this attraction of the T to the S. The first, the writer will not be able to write all the words which has the spelling of a letter S followed by any other letter other than T. In the message that he wished to send, he would be able to write the word Christmas because S and the T come after another, but would not be able to write the word wish and all other words that have other letters other than the T. Second thing, which relates to information theory and probability, the letter T carries no information. Once I see an S, I know that after it is a T. So the presence of the T is superfluous. ملوش لازمة. And once I see an S, I know it's attached to a T. So that's examples to just show that here, I have to be able to write the next thing to be anything I want to do. Now, as I said, I didn't say there is God. I didn't say this, the Bible. I didn't say anything. I say evolution is a fact within limits. These limits, I'm discussing one of them today. It cannot account for the origin of life. It cannot. Because we show from history the origin of life is the origin of how DNA came into existence. Because scientifically, it's a fact. DNA carries the whole information of the species. DNA has parts of it, genes, parts of it, certain software code. That's the next part we'll discuss if you have energy, that can encode for the proteins, ignoring, if you guys study biology, the splicing of the mRNA, ignoring the folding after the amino acid chain has formed, ignoring all of this. There's a piece of software that results a certain sequence called amino acids. So the DNA has all of the information to encode the species and all of the information to sustain the species, also ignoring all of the other systems that have to exist for producing the amino acids, the ribosomes and the spliceosome and the folding, all of this. I don't want to jump to the next part, but I just wanted to, before I forget. So I presented this to them, one of the beloved Coptic people that has left the faith, and says, Abuna, this is very compelling. But it could be by chance. By chance. So I said, okay, and I'm going to get back to him. Again, it's an act of service, not an act we know better than you. So he said, the first DNA came into by chance. Okay, let's discuss how to study this chance. So that I am presenting to you, what is the chance of forming just five strands, 5 of these nucleotide pairs? And knowing that the human one is 3.2 billion letters long, or strands long, roughly. So what is the chance of nature, biochemistry, putting 5 in sequence? So it's a really probability problem. How do we solve it? We have empty 5 spots, because we don't care about this one. Once we know this one, we know what this one is, because there's a very clear affinity here. If this is an A, this has to be a T. So the problem mathematically is what is the number you can put of forming 5 that are useful together. So it's framed simply as we have 5 empty spots, and we want to fill it with a sequence, let's say CG, ATG. Just hypothetical. It's just some useful sequence that's part of a banana, for example. What is the probability of forming a sequence of just 5 DNA strands? So our probability of filling the first spot is 1/4, because you have AG, ATCG. That's 4 options. You choose one of them. It's 1/4. The same applies to the next spot, leading to the probability of filling the second spot to be also 1/4. So filling 5 of them is 1/4 times 1/4 times 1/4 times 1/4 times 1/4. In probability, it's called intersection, that all of the events happening is their multiplication. That's 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000. Can anyone tell me what's the probability of forming 10 instead of 5. If you feel you're on the spot, I'll keep going. This is not an embarrassment meeting. This is basically to form 5 is quarter times multiplied by 1 by itself 5 times. What is the probability of forming 10? It's one in a million. Basically, 1/4 multiplied by itself 10 times. Yes, 10 times. So that will give you 1/1024 times 1/1024. If you do digital, any digital work, this is very common numbers in digital systems. That's actually 1 in a million. So I want you to understand that people just throw out words that is not scientific. That's why I now call these presentations defending the science, not defending the faith. So to form just 10, and the human one is 3.2 billion long. Give me anything smaller, but I'm just choosing 10. To form 10, a sequence of 10 correctly, it's 1 in a million chance. And just keep going. So when you throw in, it came by chance, people unfortunately don't appreciate certain subjects such as statistics and probability. Therefore, numbers for them is just like, it can happen. Oh, something probable is different than something possible, because the question we get trapped in, it's possible. Do you mean it's not impossible? Well, if it's possible by the probability of 1 in a million, then 1 in a billion, then 1 in a trillion. If you say it's possible, then we left science completely. This is a faith now. Now we're going to take science as a faith, not as something tractable, testable, numerical, which is what you claim to be. Another argument said, you guys of the religion, you claim you know the answer. I didn't claim I know the answer. I am actually, I'm pointing to you to something that is completely scientific, and I'm asking you to give me an explanation. You, us, we love science too, very much, have deduced today that there's an absence of any type of forces to form a sequence. I'm not saying something religion. You cannot tell me, we don't know it now, but science will discover later. And I heard this answer, that we don't have the humility to say, I don't know, science does. This is not science saying, I don't know. This is very clear deduction in front of you that will never be changed ever, that this sequence comes not from natural forces. There's nothing we're going to discover later. Oh yeah, there is actually biochemical forces, as I said, and that's why I meant to say this. If there is biochemical forces, it will become a repeatable pattern. So I proved it in 2 ways. When I hear the answer, science has the humility to say, I don't know, but we claim that we know everything, that is not a scientific answer, and it's completely wrong. I'm not pointing to something that's up to research. I'm pointing to something that's evident over and over and over. DNA is life. DNA has freedom to form any sequence. The direction of the sequence must not have biochemical affinity. If it does have biochemical affinity, DNA would not exist. That is not a faith claim. That is a science, clear, tested, evidentiary claim. So science, unfortunately, that's why I'm very much leaning that, in fact, we have to defend the science, because now science is becoming done wrongly and conclusions are done completely wrong. And we have to be honest to the science that God has created, that is a side note, and defend it. So another culprit, this is not my field, just the joy that comes when things are in it, but you guys, some of you or all of you might know this much better than if I can even attempt to be. But reading, the DNA is formed by polymerase, and not an expert, have no knowledge, but just reading, there's multiple types of polymerase that have to exist in order to form the DNA. And another question, which I didn't tackle, which is, okay, if DNA came into existence by its own, where is the polymerase that would form it? After now we have proven that biochemistry will not be able, but there is an engine that forms it. Where would it come from? What is the origin of polymerase? And this is when we sometimes will discover later, that's actually becoming a faith. When you don't have to tackle it and says, in the future we'll discover, I'm going to take it as what we're taught now by these hugely funded professors, because who's this Abuna who's going to discover something that is not in the universities? I'm just a fresh look from computer engineering at the systems that are taught under biology and biochemistry. I'm not discovering, I'm just having a new lens on it. So the primary role of DNA polymerases is to accurately and efficiently replicate the genome in order to ensure the maintenance of the genetic information and its faithful transmission through generations. These are very, very, very heavy designed words. I worked on the design of first generation of digital cameras, and the amount of details to get something out of the door that the customer is going to use and pay money for it, the amount of inventions in it and the patents to go into what you can operate in 2 minutes is much, much more than something that will take you an hour to operate, because you wanted to make it so easy and intelligent enough to be for the user very, very simple. So maintenance, faithfulness, the transmission of data, and this is required so that there is no sickness that would happen. You would know the result of the polymerase wouldn't work. I don't. This is not a simple task considering the size of the genome and its constant exposure to indigenous and environmental DNA damaging agents. Thus, a number of DNA repair pathways operate in cells, DNA repair pathways operate in cells to protect the integrity of the genome, multiple functions of the DNA polymerases. And this is from this article. Another, in addition to the role in replication, DNA polymerases play a certain role in most of these pathways, given the multitude and the complexity of DNA transactions that depend on DNA polymerases activity. It is not surprising that cells in all organisms contain multiple, not one type, highly specialized DNA polymerases, the majority of which have only recently been discovered. So if I start with this, okay, this is Abuna, we're familiar with the design argument. The design is so amazing that it has to be designed by a God. I didn't start with this. I started with completely the absence of God, completely looking at biology history and looking at it from a viewpoint to answer one question. Can DNA come into existence by natural forces? And the answer is no. And plus, if there were natural forces in it, DNA would not operate. That's it. The rest of design argument and tuning, this is all elements we can add, but I chose to make it very, very hard to the people who want to discuss science that I don't argue with an attack or argue with design. They hate the word design, which is very, very relevant and very important because it's from the statements of biology. These are very, very important systems to have to work very accurately, and they have to exist all at once. It cannot evolve. It cannot have this part will come later, but we're going to discover it in the future. So the trick that's happening now, life started, let's focus on the future, which is exactly the Big Bang. Big Bang happened, let's focus on the future. What's before it is philosophical. What's before it is not relevant. What's before it, you're pulling us into the Bible direction, into God direction. And that's why they feed off one another, unfortunately, and it becoming atheism out of ignorance, and that icks me so much that it's not atheism out of knowledge. It's in fact out of ignorance and just taking sound bites without digging deeper. 5 DNA polymerases are now recognized in this bacteria coli and these very hard names. So just because of my ignorance, I'm just seeing what's out there, what the polymerase does, and you probably, most probably experts at it. Okay, so if the sequence is not formed by natural forces, biochemistry, then where did the sequence come from? The answer I get, first one was random, then evolution, selection, pressure. As I said, random, I discussed if 5 can come random, that's 1 in 1,000. For 10 to come randomly, that's 1 in a million. Ignoring that polymerase, that scientifically you're actually stacking up the decks against you. The Kenyon and others admit that chance alone cannot. Why is Kenyon important? I didn't get into this, but Kenyon is the father of biochemical affinity. In 1968, Kenyon and Steinman published the most sold book in grad school ever, which said, here is the DNA, chance cannot form this, but biochemical attraction did. And I challenge today the biochemical attraction. So biochemical attraction or affinity is non-existent, plus if it exists, DNA would not exist, as we demonstrated. The other thing, science will find a way in the same fashion that believers used God to explain things, and then science found a rationale for it. Sure, at some point, it's just, if it's not understood, because faithful people says God made it this way, and in fact, the church in Europe, not in the Middle East, not in the East at all, in the progression of science, burned scientists like Giordano Bruno in 1600 related to cosmology because he insisted of what Galileo said about the earth, and Galileo repented on paper in front of the church to stay, because he was very devout, to stay part of the church. But Giordano Bruno insisted, and they ended up burning him in 1600 in Rome because he insisted on Galileo's findings. So that's taken as a very bad spot against the church, and I would agree with this. But this is a dark area, and now this is not what we're using to cover a gap. What I showed today is not a gap that we're covering by God. I'm just showing a scientific fact that you have to give an explanation, a very scientific explanation of where would a sequence would come from, because chance would not do it. So I'll stop here. We can make this as another talk, which is the angle of protein synthesis. I don't want to go another half an hour, because being very careful with your energy levels. But I'm open to questions, and it could be a third part of discussion Genesis 1, in how to understand the sequence of the creation in Genesis 1, and what do we conclude from it. But today I just wanted, by God's grace, to involve you into getting a taste of that. You're subjected to a type of science that, if anything is not understood, put the word evolve in it, and it becomes scientific. That's actually a faith. If anything is very difficult to explain, that, for example, the formation of the human eye came from previous systems, and then with addition of proteins here and there, then the human visual system developed. This is what is in fact in the biology, AP biology book that is taught in schools. And this is called acceptation. Acceptation means the addition of things gradually to become a complex system, and has no regard to whatever functionality or design. So what I've seen in these books, if a simpler eye has the same proteins as our eye, then our eye must have come from a simpler eye. That's equivalent, in fact, in design, that if the toaster and the car have the same minerals, then they must have come from one another, because they have the same elements that compose them. And when things are complicated, because evolution is the only accepted, there is lawsuits, by the way, from teaching boards, that is legally, it's a crime in the United States to teach science in any other way other than evolution. And there is statements of judges that about this. So we are living in an era where actually, I think we should defend the science. I'm not defending the existence of God. The science is the way we should freely come up with the sequence of science: observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and observation is lost. It became, put the word evolved, and it's scientific. And I have quotations from the books, many of them here, but I didn't want to go further. I'm not saying take it by faith. I have evidence for this. I just wanted to give today the most elementary, unseen fact about DNA. So it covers the question. I didn't say God is a creator. I just said life is the DNA existence. DNA cannot come by biochemistry. So it begs the question, where does the sequence come from? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the great lecture. Just anyone have a question? Anyone have a question? Abuna, you want to ask any questions?
I hope I didn't bore you.
Okay.
I hope it was a fresh view that you can see that science is a gift from God. I'm actually very, very much proponent that the logic and the science is something that God mandates us to use. It's unfortunately being done in the wrong way. There's a hand back there.
Yeah, I noticed that you mentioned in the beginning that you were talking about a book. Is it a book that you're writing, or is it?
Yeah, it's a book that I just finished. I just finished it yesterday for this meeting. In fact, it's I can share the screen. I put it on Amazon yesterday. Sure. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, the rest of this lecture, which is the DNA, the translation transcription, which is an amazing, amazing system, how it is relevant to look at it and how it relates to exactly like microprocessor design. People who study engineering will appreciate it, but if you don't have that background, I give enough explanation to make you able to gather the subject. But the document, I said, hopefully, because David asked me to, can we get the PowerPoint, and the answer, I can't give it because for a simple reason, just I teach this in the Acts seminary, the seminary school of the diocese, and not for myself, not for any profit, but the students pay to get a degree, and they opt to choose subjects, and I'm one of the subjects. So they attend, and these are the ones I can give them the PowerPoint. So if I just give it out freely, then they will feel it's not fair to them as attending the class. But however, I wanted this to be recorded with the screenshot so that you can use it at your leisure, please. And more stuff is found in the book. It's all there, and it's work in progress because there is some things that I haven't discussed yet. I'm stopping just now today because of the time. We can go on another hour at least to see other angles that will just make it very, very attractive.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I know you touched base on this, but what would be the short answer when people say you still have faith in science and say, yeah, there's a gap in science. One day they're going to come up with an answer, but we still believe in science. What should we what would be the short answer for this from faith point of view, or from Christian?
The part I missed is that they believe in science and the science will still come up with an answer.
Yeah. If that's their argument, what should we answer to this?
You should display what I showed today as the origin of life is ignored. It's now moving on. There is two tricks that happen in science. Use the word evolve, it makes everything scientific. That's actually a faith, because anything you put the word evolve in, it becomes science. You cannot discuss it, but they will not like that answer. But the second thing, the concept of origins is completely missed, and they have to argue the origin of life and the operation. I have passages here from the biology books that the pathways to describe how transcription and translation, which is how protein is synthesized, can describe by evolution. Biologists are in despair of trying to find the pathways to explain this process. There is words in the biology books, when it's not understood, let's throw it on the future. Okay, God asked us, be ready to give an answer. Actually, I was just sitting somebody here in Kitchener. Thank God it was amazing grace, because he was very objective when I gave this topics, and another one, which is Christianity man-made, because it's like a bunch of stories in the Bible. He actually wanted to read more about it, because I tackled a part where if he's honest with himself, he will want to know more about it to form a decision. But the decision is his. So you don't have to convince. You have to give an argument, a very good argument that's respectful. And very often when I did this, the person didn't get convinced, but the feedback I'm giving you today is because of some answers I got from them that made me go and dig deeper, like the chance answer that was formed by chance. I was surprised. And I didn't give the numbers at that meeting, but I was going to go back to meet with that person because I love him. He's a very, very, very decent Coptic person. The validation I got from him about this approach was very encouraging because he, with his expertise, said that what I'm presenting here is very, very strong. So that is a result of the meeting. Did I convince him? Probably not. But because he felt he's not sitting with the priest to get a sermon, he was very happy to give an answer that it was very valid. And the answer he gives, and he still insists that evolution pressure is what formed the direction of the DNA to form different species. So I might never convince him, but the convincing part is the connecting with the person with love and not demeaning. And you offer the explanation.
It's more for us too, right?
Yes, exactly. Be ready to give an answer. I didn't say be ready to convince. St. Paul stood in front of rulers and said, I want you to be like me, except for these chains in front of Agrippa. Did Agrippa convert? He didn't. But the demeanor of St. Paul made Agrippa says, Paul, was a letter, you're going to make me Christian. He's almost there because of the attitude of St. Paul. So be ready to give an answer. And if the person not convinced, take the counter answer to them and go and do more work.
Thank you everyone so much.
Sure.
Anyone else have a question, guys? Any of the questions you sent on Slido hasn't been addressed to everyone? All good? One final word? Nothing? Thank you so much, Abuna. We're just going to have a photo with you. So you are up there on the screen. We're going to be standing down there and take a photo and then keep us in your prayers.
That's very...
I think we've got some question on Slido app, right, David? Right, David, we've got some questions on Slido app. We got these all answered.
Pretty much most of them, and no one else has any questions.
I have the 4 questions, Abby, on the email that David sent, and these are the main what I mean. The creation part is going to be. I will take more time of them, which is what I discussed in the other meeting with OTSEC, which is the 6 days of the creation. How improbable that a human can write these verses, but they can share this, or if they want to have another meeting outside of the theme of the month, I'm so willing to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Abuna, for your time and very knowledgeable and scientific lecture. I enjoyed it so much, and I think they did the same. And we need to get a promise from Abuna to have a meeting in person as well. For those they don't know, I've asked Abuna Gregory to have an in-person meeting, and he had some circumstances came up and he couldn't make it. But we need to get a promise from Abuna for future meetings to make them in person if possible.
Let's pray that I get another father ordained with me in the church, and that the promise can become a reality.
Of course, Abuna. Thank you so much once again, Abuna, for your time and
My pleasure.
very enjoyable lecture.
My pleasure. Thank you all so much for attending. I appreciate it. ناخد photo, sure. Can I get the copy of this photo later? Photo predestination.
لا هو يغفر. Who's taking the picture? Yeah. Oh, yeah, you need to send it back.
Okay, that's
Thank you so much, Abuna.
No, thank you for having me. It's really enjoyable.
Good luck.
And I'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Abi Halil.